The iron shackles bit into Cordelia's wrists as the auctioneer's gavel struck wood with a sharp crack that echoed across the dusty town square. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" His voice boomed over the jeering crowd gathered beneath the blazing Tennessee sun of 1847. Cordelia kept her chin raised despite the humiliation burning through her chest. She had been sold like livestock, not into slavery, for she was white as fresh cream, but into indentured servitude to pay her father's gambling debts. The chains around her ankles clinked as she shifted, scanning the sea of leering faces below the auction platform. $50, called out Barnabas Crowther, the town's wealthiest merchant, his gold teeth gleaming as he grinned. Several women whispered behind their fans, knowing full well what Crowther intended for any young woman who entered his household. 60, shouted another bidder. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard the stories, girls who disappeared into Crowther's mansion, never to be seen again except as hollow-eyed servants who wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. 75. Crowther's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. The auctioneer raised his gavel. "Going once for $75, 100. The voice was quiet, steady, and came from the back of the crowd. Heads turned to see a tall man in simple brown clothes step forward. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially shadowing eyes the color of storm clouds. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, yet there was something almost gentle in his bearing. Crowther's face darkened. 125. 150. The stranger's voice remained calm, unbothered by the escalating price. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Few men in Millbrook had that kind of money to spend so casually. Cordelia found herself staring at this mysterious bidder, trying to read his intentions in the set of his jaw, the way he stood with his hands loose at his sides. 200. Crowther snarled, his face now red with anger and exertion. The stranger met Cordelia's eyes across the crowd, and something passed between them, not pity, which she had expected, but recognition. As if he saw not a commodity on the auction block, but a person whose dignity was being stripped away piece by piece. $300. The crowd fell silent. Even the auctioneer's mouth hung open. $300 was more than most men in Millbrook made in 2 years. Crowther's eyes bulged. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly calculating whether his desire was worth bankrupting himself. "Going once," the auctioneer called, his voice cracking with excitement. "Going twice." The stranger never looked away from Cordelia's face. "Sold. To the gentleman for $300. As the gavel fell, Cordelia felt her knees nearly buckle. She had been bought by a complete stranger, a man whose name she didn't even know. Yet somehow, as he approached the platform with steady steps, she felt the first flutter of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either. The auctioneer unlocked her shackles with trembling hands, clearly overwhelmed by the unprecedented sale. The stranger, her new master, extended his hand to help her down from the platform. "My name is Matthias Raven," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "And you won't be wearing chains in my house." The wagon ride to Matthias Raven's property took them through winding mountain roads lined with towering oaks and maples, just beginning to show their autumn colors. Cordelia sat beside him on the wooden seat, acutely aware of the man who had just purchased her freedom, or her bondage. She couldn't yet tell which. "You're wondering what I want from you," Matthias said without turning from the road ahead. His hands were steady on the reins, calloused but gentle as he guided his 2 bay horses around a sharp curve. Cordelia pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Most men don't spend $300 without expecting something in return. Most men didn't watch their sister sold at auction when they were 16 years old. The quiet admission hung in the air between them like morning mist. Cordelia studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hold old pain like river stones hold water. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "Evangeline died in childbirth 3 years later. Her master never bothered to tell our family until months after the funeral." His voice remained steady, but Cordelia caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I swore I'd never let another woman suffer that fate if I had the power to prevent it." They emerged from the forest into a valley that took Cordelia's breath away. A modest but well-built log house sat nestled against a hillside with a barn, and several outbuildings scattered around it. Gardens bursting with late vegetables stretched across the flat land, and a clear stream bubbled nearby. It looked like something from a dream, peaceful, self-contained, far from the cruelty of towns and auction blocks. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow," Matthias said, and for the first time that day, she heard warmth in his voice. As they approached the house, an older black woman emerged from the gardens, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was silver-streaked and pulled back in a neat bun, and her face held the kind of strength that comes from surviving hardship with dignity intact. "Matthias," she called out, then stopped short when she saw Cordelia. "Well, I see you went through with your fool plan after all. Cordelia, meet Mercy Washington. She runs this household far better than I ever could." Matthias jumped down from the wagon and extended his hand to help Cordelia descend. "Mercy, this is Cordelia. She'll be staying with us." Mercy's sharp eyes took in Cordelia's torn dress, her pale face, the red marks still visible on her wrists from the shackles. Her expression softened immediately. "Lord have mercy. Child, you look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. Come on, let's get some food in you." "I should explain," Cordelia began, but Mercy waved her words away. "Explanations can wait. Empty stomachs can't." She put a gentle but firm hand on Cordelia's elbow. "Matthias, you see to the horses. This girl needs tending to." As Mercy led her toward the house, Cordelia felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. The older woman's presence was like a warm hearth, comforting, reliable, steady. "Is he really ... Cordelia started to ask, then didn't know how to finish the question. "A good man? Yes, child. One of the best I've known, and I've known plenty of both kinds." Mercy paused on the porch steps. "He bought my freedom 2 years ago, then asked me to stay and help him run this place. Pays me wages, treats me like family. There's nothing but kindness in that man's heart, though he carries more guilt than any soul should bear." Guilt? For not being able to save his sister, for having money now when he was dirt poor then, for every woman he can't help. Mercy opened the front door, revealing a cozy interior with handmade furniture and shelves lined with books. "He sees rescuing you as a chance to make amends for the past. Question is, what do you see it as?" Cordelia stepped across the threshold, leaving behind the life where she had been property, and entering one where she might be able to become herself again. 3 weeks into her stay at Raven's Hollow, Cordelia still woke each morning expecting to find herself back in chains. Freedom, she discovered, was harder to accept than bondage. At least in Shackles, she had known what was expected of her: submission, silence, survival. Here, Matthias asked her what she wanted for breakfast. "I don't understand you," she said one morning as they worked side by side in the vegetable garden. The late October air was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds as she spoke. "You paid $300 for me, but you treat me like a guest." Matthias paused in his weeding, dirt-stained hands resting on his knees. "What would you have me treat you like?" "Like what I am, your property." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but they were the truth. "The law says I owe you 7 years of labor. The law says many things I don't agree with." He pulled another weed, his movements precise and methodical. Tell me, Cordelia, what did you do before your father's debts caught up with you? The question startled her. No one had asked about her life before the auction. I was a teacher in a small schoolhouse outside Nashville. Did you enjoy it? I loved it. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. I loved watching children discover that letters could become words, words could become stories, stories could become ... possibilities. Matthias nodded slowly. There are 12 children in Millbrook who walk 5 miles each way to the nearest school. The town's been trying to hire a teacher for 2 years. Cordelia's hand stilled in the dirt. What are you saying? I'm saying freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's having choices. He met her eyes, and she saw no manipulation there, no hidden agenda, just quiet sincerity. You could teach again if you wanted. I'd help you get established. But the contract can be dissolved. I have the paperwork. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a folded document. Your debt is paid. You're free to go wherever you choose, whenever you choose. Cordelia stared at the papers as if they might burst into flame. Why? Because no one should have to earn their humanity. That evening, Cordelia sat on the porch steps watching the sun set behind the mountains. The valley was painted in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear Mercy humming as she prepared supper. It was the most peaceful place she had ever been, and the most terrifying. Having second thoughts? Matthias settled beside her on the steps, careful to leave space between them. I don't know how to want things anymore, she admitted. For so long, I only thought about surviving each day. I forgot there could be more. What did you want? Before? Cordelia closed her eyes, reaching back to memories she had buried deep to keep them safe. I wanted to write a book. Stories for children about brave girls who saved themselves. I wanted to travel, to see the ocean. She laughed, a sound tinged with old pain. Silly dreams for a woman. Not silly. Delayed. She turned to look at him, this man who had bought her freedom and then given it back. What do you want, Matthias? What do you dream about? For a long moment, he was quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to lean closer to hear. I dream about a house full of laughter instead of silence. About conversations. That last past supper. About someone who chooses to stay, not because they have to, but because they want to. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of loneliness recognized, of two souls who had been shaped by loss learning to hope again. The children in Millbrook, Cordelia said slowly. How far did you say they walked to school? Matthias smiled, the first truly joyful expression she had seen on his face. 5 miles, each way. That's too far for little ones. Much too far. Cordelia looked out at the valley, at this place where kindness lived quietly and dreams might actually take root. I suppose someone should do something about that. I suppose they should. As darkness settled over Raven's Hollow, Cordelia felt the last of her chains fall away, not the iron ones, but the invisible ones she had carried in her heart. Freedom, she realized, wasn't something that could be given or taken away. It was something that had to be chosen, again and again, with each new dawn. The Millbrook schoolhouse rose from the valley floor like a promise kept. Cordelia stood in the doorway of the one-room building that Matthias and half the town had worked to construct over the past month, breathing in the scent of fresh pine lumber and new beginnings. It's perfect, she whispered, running her fingers along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk that Matthias had crafted himself, carving small wildflowers into the corners. Not too simple? He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. Over the weeks of planning and building, the careful distance they had maintained began to dissolve into something deeper, more complex. Simple can be beautiful. She turned to face him and found herself caught by the intensity in his gray eyes. The most important lessons often are. The first students arrived the following Monday, 12 children ranging from 6 to 14. Their faces bright with curiosity and nervous excitement. Little Patience Whitmore clung to her older brother's hand, while the Morrison twins whispered excitedly to each other in rapid German, their family having recently arrived from Bavaria. "Welcome," Cordelia said, her voice clear and warm in the crisp November air. "I'm Miss Cordelia Bramwell, and this is our school." As the weeks passed, the schoolhouse became the heart of the small community. Parents began stopping by to discuss their children's progress, often lingering to chat about crops and weather and the small happenings that make up the fabric of rural life. Cordelia found herself invited to Sunday dinners and barn raisings, slowly weaving into the community that had welcomed both her and her unconventional story, but it was the quiet moments with Matthias that she treasured most. He would arrive each evening as she finished preparing lessons, officially to walk her safely back to Ravens Hollow, but often they would sit in the schoolhouse talking until the stars came out. "You're different now," he observed one evening as she organized books on the new shelves. "There's light in your eyes again. Teaching does that to me. It always has." She paused, holding a primer against her chest. "But it's more than that. It's this place. It's—" She looked at him, this man who had seen her at her most broken and helped her become whole again. "It's you." Matthias crossed the room slowly, as if approaching a wild deer that might startle and run. "Cordelia, I need you to know I never brought you here expecting anything. Your freedom isn't conditional on—" She pressed her fingers gently to his lips, silencing his careful words. "I know. That's what makes this real." He caught her hand in his, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I loved you from the moment you held your head high on that auction block, refusing to let them break your spirit. And I love you." The words felt like sunrise after a long, dark night. "I love your gentleness, your integrity, the way you see the person instead of the circumstance." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "Will you marry me, Cordelia? Not because of debt or obligation, but because you choose to?" "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and tasting of possibilities. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of applause from the schoolhouse doorway. Mercy stood there with tears in her eyes and a wide grin on her face, flanked by several of the town's women who had apparently come to check on the new teacher. "About time," Mercy declared. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other until spring." Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife, clapped her hands together. "A Christmas wedding? Oh, how lovely. We'll need to start planning immediately." "Now hold on," Cordelia laughed, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Enjoy. We just got engaged 30 seconds ago." "Exactly," said Mrs. Morrison, the twins' mother. "No time to waste. December weddings are the most romantic." Matthias wrapped his arm around Cordelia's waist, pulling her close against his side. "What do you think, my love? A Christmas wedding?" Cordelia looked around at these women who had welcomed her without question, at the schoolhouse that represented her dreams made real, at the man whose patient love had taught her that she was worthy of happiness. "I think," she said, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek, "that sounds perfect." As the women bustled around them, already making plans for flowers and food and festivities, Cordelia marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago, she had been property, a commodity to be bought and sold. Now she was a teacher, a valued member of a community, and soon to be a bride chosen out of love rather than obligation. The bell in the schoolhouse tower began to ring, though no one had touched the rope. They all looked up in wonder as it pealed across the valley, clear and sweet. As if the very building was celebrating along with them, snow began falling on the morning of December 23rd, dusting Ravens Hollow in pristine white that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the winter sunlight. Cordelia stood at her bedroom window, watching Matthias and the other men haul evergreen boughs toward the barn where the ceremony would take place, and felt a profound sense of rightness settle in her bones. "You're glowing," Mercy said from behind her, carrying Cordelia's wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk that the women of Millbrook had sewn together, each contributing what they could. Mrs. Henderson had donated lace from her grandmother's wedding veil, while Mrs. Morrison had embroidered delicate wildflowers along the neckline. "I'm nervous," Cordelia admitted, turning from the window. "Good nervous, but nervous all the same. Course you are. Marriage is a leap of faith, even when you're jumping toward the right man." Mercy helped her into the dress, her experienced fingers working the tiny pearl buttons. "But if anyone deserves happiness, child, it's you. You've both been through enough sorrow to appreciate the joy when it comes." Through the thin walls, they could hear the sounds of celebration already beginning, children's laughter, the scrape of fiddles being tuned, the cheerful chaos of a community coming together for one of their own. A soft knock at the door made them both pause. "Come in," Cordelia called. To her surprise, it was Evangeline Hartwell, Barnabas Crowther's former housekeeper, holding a small wrapped package. The older woman had been one of the few people brave enough to quit Crowther's employ after witnessing his treatment of the young women in his household. "Miss Cordelia, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Evangeline said quietly. "I wanted to give you this before the ceremony." Cordelia unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small leather-bound journal with stories embossed on the cover. In gold lettering. "I remembered you mentioning that you wanted to write books for children," Evangeline explained. "This seemed like the right time for new beginnings." Tears pricked Cordelia's eyes. "It's beautiful, thank you. There's something else." Evangeline's voice dropped even lower. "Crowther left town last week. Word is he's gone back east, run out of business by decent folks who wouldn't tolerate his ways anymore. You won't be bothered by him again." Relief flooded through Cordelia. She hadn't realized she'd been carrying that fear until it lifted from her. Shoulders like a weight she could finally set down. By late afternoon, the barn had been transformed into something magical. Pine boughs and holly berries decorated every surface, candles flickered from mason jars hung on wire, and the sweet scent of cinnamon and wood smoke filled the air. The entire community had gathered, farmers and shopkeepers, children and grandparents, all dressed in their finest clothes and wearing expressions of genuine joy. Reverend Collins stood at the front of the barn, his kind face beaming as he watched Cordelia make her way down the makeshift aisle on Mercy's arm. She had asked the older woman to give her away, having no family of her own present, and Mercy had wept with pride at the honor. But Cordelia only had eyes for Matthias. He stood straight and handsome in his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed and his gray eyes bright with emotion. When she reached him, he extended his hand, and she placed hers in it without hesitation. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Collins began, but Cordelia barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Matthias's gaze, in the promise she saw there, in the certainty that whatever hardships life might bring, they would face them together. "Do you, Matthias Raven, take Cordelia Bramwell to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better, or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," Matthias said, his voice strong and sure. "Do you, Cordelia Bramwell, take Matthias Raven to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Cordelia thought of the girl who had stood on that auction block 6 months ago, broken and hopeless, and the woman she had become through love and patience and her own determination to heal. I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Matthias, you may kiss your bride." His kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before God and community. Around them, the barn erupted in cheers and applause, but Cordelia felt as if they were alone in the world, just the two of them beginning their new life together. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, someone in the back began singing "Joy to the World," and soon the entire gathering had joined in. The barn filled with voices raised in celebration, and Cordelia felt her heart swell with gratitude for this community that had embraced her, for the man who loved her, for the second chance at life she had never dared to hope for. Later, as they danced to the fiddle music on the barn floor cleared of hay bales, Matthias whispered in her ear, "No regrets, Mrs. Raven?" She smiled up at him, this good man who had seen her worth when she had forgotten it herself. "Only that it took us so long to find each other." "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," he said, spinning her around as snow continued to fall outside, blanketing their world in clean, pure white. Everything before was just preparation for this moment. Spring arrived early at Raven's Hollow, painting the valley in tender shades of green and bringing with it a contentment Cordelia had never imagined possible. As Mrs. Raven, she found her days filled with the sweet rhythm of married life, teaching at the schoolhouse, tending their expanded gardens with Matthias, and working on her book of children's stories in the evenings by lamplight. "Listen to this," she said one April evening, reading aloud from her manuscript as Matthias whittled a new toy for little Patience Whitmore. Princess Brightwood had been locked in the tower by the wicked king, but she did not wait for rescue. Instead, she used her wit and courage to save herself, and in doing so, discovered she had been powerful all along. Matthias looked up from his carving, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know a girl like that once. Proud and brave, even in chains. Do you think children will like these stories? Are they too bold? They're perfect. Children need to know they have power in their own lives, that they don't have to wait for someone else to save them." He set down his whittling and moved to sit beside her on the porch swing. "Speaking of children, Something in his tone made her look up from her pages. "What is it?" "Mercy told me something interesting today. About the Kellerman family." Cordelia knew the named German immigrants who had arrived in Millbrook over the winter, only to have tragedy strike when fever took both parents, leaving behind 3 young children with no relatives in America. "The county wants to send them to the orphanage in Nashville," Matthias continued quietly. "But Mercy thinks, that is, we both think they might be happier here." Cordelia's heart began to race. "Here? With us?" "Only if you want to. I know we've been married just a few months, and it would mean—" She silenced him with a kiss, her manuscript sliding forgotten to the porch floor. "Yes," she breathed against his lips. "Oh yes, of course yes." 2 weeks later, Heinrich, Greta, and little Klaus Kellerman arrived at Raven's Hollow with all their worldly possessions in a single carpet bag. Heinrich, at 12, tried to be the man of the family, his thin shoulders squared with determination. 8-year-old Greta clutched a worn doll, her blue eyes wide with uncertainty, while 5-year-old Klaus hid behind his siblings, thumb firmly in his mouth. "Welcome home," Cordelia said gently, crouching down to their level. "Are you hungry? Mercy's made fresh bread, and there's jam from our own strawberry patch." It took weeks for the children to truly believe they were safe, that this new family wouldn't disappear like everything else in their young lives. Heinrich gradually stopped hoarding food in his pockets. Greta began to sing German lullabies while helping in the garden. Klaus attached himself to Matthias like a shadow, following the quiet man around the farm and chattering in a mixture of German and English. "They're healing. Mercy observed one evening as they watched Matthias teach all 3 children to skip stones in the creek. Children are resilient, but they need love to make it true. We're all healing, Cordelia replied, her hand resting on her still flat belly. She hadn't told Matthias yet about the child growing within her, wanting to be certain before she shared the news. The revelation came naturally one evening in late June as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. Matthias was reading one of her finished stories aloud, practicing the voices she'd created for each character, when she realized she couldn't wait another moment. "There's going to be another voice in our family soon," she said quietly. He looked up from the pages, and she watched understanding dawn in his gray eyes. "Cordelia, are you saying—" "I'm saying our family is going to grow again. This winter, we'll have a baby." The manuscript fell from his hands as he pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the porch despite her laughing protests to be careful. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "I love you, Mrs. Raven," he whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "I love our family, our life, this beautiful thing we're building together." "I love you too," she replied, thinking of how far they had both traveled from that dusty auction block to this moment of perfect happiness. All of it. Every imperfect, wonderful piece. As summer deepened into autumn, their house filled with the sounds Matthias had once dreamed of: children's laughter, spirited conversations at the dinner table, the cozy chaos of a family growing and thriving. Cordelia's book found a publisher in Nashville, and soon, Tales of Brave Girls was being read in schoolhouses across Tennessee. "You did it," Matthias said one evening, holding the first printed copy of her book while baby William nursed contentedly in Cordelia's arms. Their son had arrived in February with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. "We did it," she corrected, looking around their sitting room where Heinrich worked on his arithmetic. Greta read to Klaus, and Mercy dozed in her rocking chair, knitting needles still in her hands. All of us together. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but inside Raven's Hollow, warmth and love and the sweet promise of tomorrow filled every corner. Cordelia had learned that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, it was the presence of choice. The power to build something beautiful from broken pieces, and the courage to believe in second chances. 10 years had transformed Raven's Hollow from a quiet homestead into the bustling heart of a thriving community. The original schoolhouse had been expanded twice, and Cordelia now oversaw 3 teachers who helped educate the growing number of children in the valley. Her series of Brave Girls books had become popular throughout the South, inspiring young readers and providing a steady income that allowed the Ravens to help other families in need. "Mama, tell us again about the auction," 8-year-old William requested as the family gathered around the fireplace one winter evening. He sat nestled between Heinrich and Greta, now 22 and 18 respectively, both married and living nearby with children of their own. "William," Matthias chided gently from his chair, where he was bouncing 2-year-old Rose on his knee. "Your mother doesn't need to. It's all right," Cordelia said, setting down her sewing. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world. "It's part of our family story." Klaus, now 15 and nearly as tall as his adoptive father, looked up from the book he was reading. "I like the part where Papa outbid that awful Crowther." "Man." "The best part," little Rose lisped, clapping her chubby hands, "is when Papa said no chains in his house." Cordelia smiled, catching Matthias's eye across the room. They had told their children the truth about how they met, believing that understanding their family's origins would help them value freedom and compassion. But the story had evolved over the years from one of rescue to one of mutual salvation. "The most important part," Cordelia said, settling back in her chair, "is that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. A knock at the front door interrupted the family gathering. Matthias frowned. Visitors were unusual on such a snowy night. He opened the door to find a young woman standing on their porch, clutching a carpet bag and shivering in a thin coat. "Are you Matthias Raven?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am. Please, come in from the cold." The girl couldn't have been more than 17, with auburn hair and frightened green eyes. She stepped into the warmth of their home. Looking around in wonder at the family scene, children reading by the fire, Mercy nodding in her chair, the sense of safety and love that permeated every corner. "My name is Ophelia Sterling," she said, still clutching her bag. "I heard. That is, someone told me you might help people like me." Cordelia rose from her chair, her heart already opening to this lost soul. "What kind of help do you need, dear?" "I was indentured to a family in Nashville. They were unkind. I ran away, but I have nowhere to go, and if they find me—" She began to cry, the tears of someone who had held them back too long. Matthias and Cordelia exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Over the years they had helped dozens of people in desperate circumstances, runaway servants, abandoned children, families facing poverty or persecution. Their home had become known as a place of sanctuary where broken souls could find healing and hope. "You're safe now," Cordelia said firmly, moving to put her arms around the trembling girl. "They won't find you here." "But I have nothing to offer in return," Ophelia protested. "No skills, no money. Can you read?" Heinrich asked quietly. "Yes. I can read and write well. I was educated before my father died and left me in debt. The school can always use another teacher's aide," Greta added warmly. "And there's room in the cottage by the creek if you'd like your own space. Or you can stay here until you decide what you want to do," Matthias said. "The choice is yours." Ophelia looked around at these strangers who were offering her everything. She had lost safety, purpose, dignity, choice. "I don't understand. Why would you help me?" William piped up from his spot by the fire. "Because Mama says we're all connected, like links in a chain. When we help someone else, we make the whole chain stronger. And because," Cordelia added softly, thinking of her own desperate night so many years ago, "everyone deserves a second chance at happiness." As Mercy bustled about preparing a room for their unexpected guest, and the children chattered excitedly about showing Ophelia around the valley, Matthias slipped his arm around Cordelia's waist. "No regrets?" he asked, using the same words from their wedding night. She leaned into his embrace, watching their children, biological and adopted, biological and chosen, welcome another lost soul into their circle of love. "Only that there aren't enough hours in the day to help everyone who needs it," she replied. "Then we'll just have to make the hours count." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Raven's Hollow in pristine white. But inside the warm house, another story was beginning, one of healing and hope, of chains transformed into choices, of auction blocks becoming doorways to freedom.